قد أتاهم من علاكم مؤيدا بنقولي الله 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 يا مولانا الله 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 بفضلك كوني قد تشفعت في أموري إلهي بالنبي المشفع المقبول الله 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 يا مولانا بفضلك كوني كل من حط رحله بكريم نال أقصى المنى وكل سوني الله 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 يا مولانا الله 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 قد شكرنا إله في كل وقت الله الله حيث من بزورة لرسوله الله 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 فرحنا بنا وكذاك لكل من في باقينا الله الله من صحاب كذاك نسل الباتل الله الله فرحنا بنا وكذاك لكل زوج وبنتنا الله الله وابن منجل الأنام يوم الحلول الله وكذاك لكل من في أحدنا الله الله من شهيد كذاك عم رسولي الله قد طالبنا بهم تمام السلام الله الله في مصير لأرضنا ودخولي الله وطالبنا النجاة في يوم حشري الله الله وسلام من كل فظ جاهلي الله الله ربي صل على نبي وآله الله الله وسحاب وتابع بشمله الله
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. May Allah constantly keep us, as the refrain of this beautiful song Diwan reads, نحن في روضة الرسول حضور. That may we constantly yearn to be in the garden of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fully present. حضورا طالبين الرضا وحسن قبول. That we seek fulfillment, contentment, and acceptance. May this song ring in our hearts forever and ever, and may it manifest itself both in the inner and our outward lives, inshallah. Our program today suggests that we start off with our beloved brother Sidi Ali Allawi, who will address the topic which was scheduled for yesterday on Ibn Arabi. And then we have Sidi Hussam Raouf, who would speak on Beyond Rationality, and followed by Sidi Alia Hairi, who will speak on the topic, Only You Can Stop the Illusion. Welcome once again to each one of you, and I trust that you are all well and have slept well, and that you are all re-energized with your turbocharged hearts and minds for the journey ahead in the roller coaster ride, inshallah, of enlightenment, of joy, and companionship, inshallah. May I ask Sidi Ali Allawi to join me here to address the topic on Ibn Arabi's life. وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the uninitiated, Sidi Ali Allawi is one of our great brothers who's published a lot, which has inspired many in this hall and outside of this hall. Is currently based at the and associated with the St. Anthony's College at Oxford University, and is also a visiting fellow at the International Islamic Institute in Kuala Lumpur. And I can go on for quite some time, but I shall leave it at that. Sidi Ali Allawi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I'll try to give what is known as a fusion talk, but I'm trying to figure out how to connect the Mi'raj of a wali with the situation of Muslims today. But I think we will find, inshallah, the Hamza, the connecting point. So I'll start, inshallah, with the outline of the discussion that was supposed to be given yesterday, but obviously with the presence of two great shuyukh, it was completely redundant, because all one had to do was to look at them and to see the reality and realization of Mi'raj in action. The biography of Ibn Arabi is really extremely extensive, and it covers and spans all the potentialities of a human being. One of the main problems that I have had with him is really his immensity in terms of the kind of experiences and exposures that he had. This is really not normally experienced by any person. His travels around the entire universe of Islam, both physical, corporeal, and spiritual, were unparalleled. He undertook several journeys. He was born in Andalusia and undertook several journeys into North Africa before moving to the East. He wandered in the East, in many countries, spent several years receiving incredible openings and revelations or futuhat that formed the basis of his spiritual architecture, if you want to call it that. He was a polymath, a great linguist, a great grammarian, a historian, a narrator of hadith, and the most incredible intimacy of direct access and knowledge of the Quran Kareem. So one can spend years talking about his seerah and his actions and his spiritual openings and insights. And you can also spend a lot of time valuably examining and reflecting on his outer actions. He ended up as one of the main Malki judges in Damascus. And contrary to what people may believe, he would have acted. He was exhorting Muslims to go into jihad, to go into direct action against invading forces from Byzantium and later from the East. So he was not, his Islam and his knowledge of the inner unfolding of Allah's plans and designs did not stop him from being a man in action, both as a judge and as a person who exhorted to jihad. I will talk about his Mi'raj, mainly in order to establish the potential realizations of the spiritual ascensions that man is capable of, and to try to reflect on them as they relate to the Mi'raj of the noble Prophet ﷺ, which is of an altogether different dimension. How this really relates to us is while we are trying to experience states and conditions that allow us to follow in the prophetic path, it would also allow us to see the potential realization of what that path can mean in this time which we're allotted. The Mi'raj of the Prophet ﷺ is really of both the physical and the spiritual. Many commentators have tried to either look at it in terms of a bodily movement. Some have looked at it in terms of only spiritual movement. My own inference is that it is neither, it is beyond this. It is an essential movement. It is the movement of the essential spirit that is stamped on the perfect man as he returns back to the source of his own creation, that is, to the One. So the spiritual journey of the Prophet ﷺ, the ascension, the Mi'raj, is not corporeal, neither is it spiritual. It's both. Both and more. The first step of this journey, and I'd like to just go through a short description of the narrations that we have received about the prophetic Mi'raj to set the stage for the Mi'raj of the Wali, or at least the potentials that we, as holding within us the capability of fulsome realization, can aspire to with Allah's lutf. The first thing is the collapsing of distances. The Isra, that is the movement from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis, took place in a flash. Distances therefore lost their meaning. Space becomes collapsed. Space loses its function as a differentiator between bodies, between areas, between volumes. So one of the axes of existence, one of the three-dimensional axes of existence, collapses. Longitude, latitude, that axis collapses. In the Mi'raj, other axes collapse. But the stage is set by the distancing, the collapse of distance. Mashi bi tayy al-ard. You walk through the collapse of space. And sometimes we are astounded by stories about realized beings who can appear in different places at the same time. And this is possible if you believe that distances are merely aspects of the divine ordering, and therefore can be, the laws governing them can disappear for those who are chosen. In the collapsing of distancing, we are told the Prophet ﷺ sees the possibilities that are open to man, the garden and the fire. These are the sightings on the way. Distances collapse, options open. He then bridles Buraq at the Masjid al-Aqsa and then leads all the prophets in prayer. The symbolic significance of that is the array of prophethood behind the ultimate and the first prophet, the first effulgence, Prophet ﷺ. And in Bayt al-Maqdis, in Jerusalem, he is established as the carrier of Sharia by accepting the vessel that had in it laban or milk and rejecting vessels that had in it wine. And Jibreel alayhi salam congratulates him for being the bearer of the Sharia of Allah. Then the Mi'raj begins, and the unfolding of the Mi'raj is best described in the ayats of Surah Al-Najm. The Prophet ﷺ ascends the seven heavens and meets at each circle, at each of the heavens, the prophets that are responsible for that particular stage. Adam alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam, Idris alayhi salam, Harun alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, and ultimately Ibrahim. There's no dialogue between them. Mainly salam, assalamu alaikum. There's no need to dialogue between prophets, and there's no need to acknowledge the gradations of prophecy. In the end, Ibrahim alayhi salam acknowledges the ultimate source of prophethood being embodied in the person of the Prophet ﷺ. There's no dialogue between prophets, only a recognition of the source. And at the Sidrat al-Muntaha, only the Prophet ﷺ has the honor to move beyond that. Even Jibreel alayhi stops. And this confirms his prophetic stature. At that point of proximity, the Prophet ﷺ enters into a divine dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where in the form of the kitab that has been given to him. This is uha ila abdihi ma uha. The ahkam of the deen are given, the sharia is given then, the prayers, the cycles of the prayer, the sawm, the hajj, and the zakat. And these are the conditions also of the sharia established. What is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is taklif, what is obligatory. So the key element of a prophetic mi'raj is a smooth ascendancy by Allah's grace in the form of being honored. The Prophet ﷺ did not seek the Isra or the Mi'raj, did not expect it. It just happened to him. He was honored, he was chosen. The honoring of a prophet in order to go through the cycles of creation, and the giving to the prophet of a code, of a sharia, is what distinguishes prophetic passages through that of man. But it establishes the gradations and establishes the similitudes that can happen. The Mi'raj of Ahlullah is different. The Mi'raj, if you want to say, of the Sufi is different. Before Ibn Arabi, there were several written cases of, for example, Bayezid al-Bastami and his Mi'raj. But they were fragmentary and, to a large extent, not recorded in the elaborate unfolding that Ibn Arabi had. First, the Mi'raj takes place in a state generally where the person is asleep. So it is not a physical Mi'raj, neither is it a Rawhani Mi'raj in the sense that the Ruh itself moves. It's more of the movement of one parallel universe to replace another. And sleep is not one's normal sleep. It's a state whereby these symbols and the vocabulary, as it were, of this other, greater universe takes hold of a person, and in the process his consciousness changes, and his experiences are as real and as meaningful and as purposeful as can be the case if one is doing it physically. The laws that govern physical life and movement are replaced by different sets of laws that are broader, greater, and are overarching these laws. So, in many ways though, the Mi'raj of those realized beings is more of a test than it is a bestowal. The bestowal is in the form of allowing it to happen. But the Prophet ﷺ was taken directly through these stages by a process of pull. The wali, or those who seek to be in a high realized state, are seeking that condition. So they are given that condition, and there are tests associated with that. At the end though, the Mi'raj of a wali is that of a sighting and of a tasting, and not that of tashri'. No laws are brought back. No codes governing human conduct is given. And all the great sightings and visions of awliya Allah never entered into the circles of prophethood. The circles of prophethood were those with which they had to bypass. Rightly so. And it is part of the conditions. There are certain, as it were, territories, certain areas of experience which cannot include prophethood, because the ultimate prophecy has been revealed and the completion of the prophetic cycle is total. Ibn Arabi, before he wrote his book Kitab al-Mi'raj, upon which part of my talk will be based, had 5 or 6 other such experiences, and he refers to them. But in this book, Kitab al-Mi'raj, he goes into the greatest detail. He confirms that it took place while he was in his sleep, where this parallel universe moved in and seized his consciousness. And I'd just like to translate his introduction to his book. I have tried in this book to reach the abode of those in tasawwuf, those who seek intellective ascensions, the highest of spiritual stations, and the elevated and sacred degrees. And this is the ascension, the Mi'raj, of those who have inherited the canons of the prophets and messengers. And it is the Mi'raj of souls and not bodies, the ascension of secrets and not constrictions, the witnessing of gardens and the conduct resulting of taste and verification, and not a spatial covering of distance, to the heavens of meanings and not to their levels. So, any spiritual ascension, any spiritual realization has as its purpose the understanding of the meanings that underpin the creative act, that underpin the unfolding of universes, that underpin the unfolding of the entire framework of the living cosmos. And this takes place, what he says, at his highest point of his futuwah, when he was 34 years old. So it's a journey into the realm of meaning, into the realm of ma'na. And every journey has to be accompanied by a guide. His guide, he calls him the Rasul al-Tawfiq. And the guide to the higher stations, to the higher authorities, to the higher circles, is never complete unless one has a guide with him. The passage, the journey, necessitates a guide. And he calls his guide the Rasul al-Tawfiq, the guide of success, the guide of the messenger of success, who is not the Prophet ﷺ. He's a messenger. He does not establish his identity, but it must be one of those, or at least the ruh of one of those of his own teachers. He prepares him. He makes sure that his state of wudu is absolute, and then he accompanies him on this journey. And this section, just in parenthesis, the ascension or the Mi'raj of Ibn Arabi, guided by his Rasul al-Tawfiq, has been borrowed by the great Italian writer Dante in his own journeys. So the form of Dante's journey very much draws on the form of Ibn Arabi. And this shows you the extent to which the experience of realized Muslims affected the entire literature of Europe. The other condition of the Mi'raj of the Wali is to be in complete Sharia. That is, he has absolute knowledge of the conditions, the Sharia-based conditions of action and devotion. And in fact, none of these journeys is possible without a firm Sharia foundation. Anybody who bothers to read Ibn Arabi knows that it is not possible to commence this journey. It is not allowed to commence this journey unless one is in a state of absolute confirmation in Sharia. So it is not a parallel process that one goes through. It is not an alternative process. The condition of realization, or the beginning of realization, is the completion of the Sharia and the Aqidas based upon that. He also has to leave behind his entire constituent parts that make up his persona, as it were. He leaves his psychic state behind. He leaves his understanding of time, space behind. and he leaves his understanding of the elements that constitute the physical universe. In those days it was air, water, fire, and earth. Now it is whatever are the material and physical laws that bind us to a certain state of awareness and consciousness. He also moves into the seven heavens. But his seven heavens, as he talks in his introduction, are not those of the Prophet ﷺ. They are parallel to them, but they're not the same. The prophetic journey was directly through the stages where only salams were exchanged. The Mi'raj of the Wali through the stages of creation, through the stages which has at each point a prophet and the meaning of that prophet. We have to understand that the purpose of this is to see what is the meaning behind the creative act that allows the person to be in complete sajda. So each of the circles through which a wali, and inshallah any of us who has been given the idhn and the taste to go through that, has to end up in understanding purpose and meaning. The first heaven is the heaven that is presided over by Nabi Allah Adam alayhi salam. And this heaven is the heaven of deputyship, where he calls it al-wizara, the deputyship. From that term wazir comes, which means the deputy to or the executor. So the first circle of creation, as it were, the first unfolding of the heavens is the heaven which is presided over by the meaning of what to be a Khalifa of Allah. Through the second heaven, he passes through the realm of the spirituality or Rawhaniyah of Nabi Allah Isa alayhi salam. Ibn Arabi and all walis have a very profound relationship with the Prophet Isa. And here it is where the meaning of wilaya is established. What do we mean by wali? Wilaya comes under a circle that is commanded by Nabi Allah Isa. And it is a form of deputyship, but it goes beyond that. It is a form of friendship and intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the third heaven is the heaven of beauty, where the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam presides. And there it is the magnificence of the creation, of the creative act that allows Ibn Arabi and other awliyas to see the beauty behind the beautiful. And there it is also a form of witnessing, a form of shahada, where you confirm that behind all acts, all creative motions, stands the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there he also begins to hear the rings of majesty. He hears what he calls Ranan al-Jaras, the bells of majesty begin to sound in his ear, preparing him for the witnessing of the circles and spheres of majesty. Then he moves on to the wilaya, the heavens of Idris alayhi salam, where he, Ibn Arabi, is confirmed as a wali. He is confirmed that in his journey of his, where these universes transpose themselves on all known things, he is indeed a person of great wilaya. And this is where the power and qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also manifested. In the fifth heaven is the heaven presided over by the Prophet Harun alayhi salam. And there it is the meaning of the heaven over which Harun presides, Harun alayhi salam presides, is the meaning of potential. Harun alayhi salam in the Quran is mentioned frequently, mainly in association with Musa alayhi salam. And his realization of his own prophecy is not manifested as such in the Quran. But the potential of his prophecy is established by his being emphatically confirmed as a prophet. So in the realm over which the Prophet Harun alayhi salam presides is the realm of things that can be things that are potential, things that have certain possibilities. So all possibilities that exist, all things that are not already extant, that can be brought into existence, come under the circle of the Prophet Harun. He then moves into the circle of Musa alayhi salam, and there is the circle of the person who understands words. The use of words and language is critical in understanding of Arabic. Words to him are not just utterances that come from the vocal cord. They're not ways of organizing thoughts. They're not ways of expressing ideas. They are basically the underpinnings in the creative act of what he calls Nafas al-Rahman, the breath of the All-Merciful. To him, creation is a form of an utterance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that utterance is carried into the Quran. And the Quran is composed of words. So the words in the Quran have significance beyond their connectivity to form, or letters have significance beyond their connectivity to form words. And each element of the alphabet, each element, including the diacritical remarks, all of these have a certain function in the understanding of the purposes behind which creation moves. And any person who wants to understand Ibn Arabi, any person who wants to understand that entire theosophical school or hikmah school of Islam, must understand the way in which words carry a significance beyond the symbolic. They are integral and structural to their understanding of Allah's command of kun. When the Quran al-Karim says, Allah says kun, the actual kaf has a meaning, the noon has a meaning, the hamza has a meaning. So it is like learning the meaning and the purposes behind letters and behind, if these are the constituent parts of what we think of are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, then these points, these letters carry their own enormous significance. And the person who has been given or assigned the right to understand the full meaning, the full spectrum of meaning behind letters and words is the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, as he is also known as Kalim Allah, the person who spoke with Allah. Finally, we move to the seventh heaven, where the secrets of Abraham alayhi salam, who tells him the gradations of the prophets and tells him the supremacy of the, not in terms of but the combination of the entire jami', as Shaykh Fadlullah talked about, the gatheredness of prophecy is then epitomized in the person of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And here he tells him also how Musa alayhi salam sought to dialogue with Allah. He sought to see him. He wanted to see evidence, while the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was given, was granted. Alam nashrah laka sadrak, Allah says to him. While Musa ﷺ asks, Rabbi ishrah li sadri. So it's a request, while the other one is a granting. So the completion of the entire, the commands over the circles of heaven given to each of the prophets culminates in the supremacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the epitome of the prophetic path. Nabi Allah Ibrahim then tells Ibn Arabi to move on with his guide, with his Rasul al-Tawfiq, until he reaches Sidrat al-Muntaha. But again, you have to understand that we are not talking about the same experiences of the prophetic Mi'raj. This is the ascension of a person who seeks to be in or near the divine presence. The scales, the experiences may go through the same forms, but are not those with the same substantive nature. At Sidrat al-Muntaha, he is overwhelmed by light and radiance, and the raneen, the ringing of the bells, become louder and louder and louder, and he sinks into a state of terror, where his Rasul then tells him, ask for what is due to you, and not what was given to others. Each one of us is capable. This is the Mi'raj of Ibn Arabi. It is not the Mi'raj of Ali Allawi, it's not the Mi'raj of anyone of you. This is specific, it's particular. And this is exactly the courtesy, the adab, with which any true seeker seeks knowledge and ma'rifah. It is with what is due to you, what you are capable of, what your state and hal allows you to reach, what your condition allows you to achieve, not what happened to others. Ibn Arabi's Mi'raj is Ibn Arabi's Mi'raj. It is not my Mi'raj, it is not your Mi'raj. There he also meets what he calls Qutb al-Sharia, that is the Lord or the pole of the entire corpus that governs the activity of man at the level of physicality. But the Qutb refuses to accompany him. He says his only companion is his Lord. So he has to find, that confirms that at some point you cannot have visions and experiences which end up denying or modifying or eliminating or cancelling the Sharia. The person who has had the most elaborate experience with inner visions in the history of Islam, at least those that we know of, because he has recorded them, was Ibn Arabi. And he steers clear from any attempt to come up with new commands and new codas and decrees. He then goes through a number of divine presences or hadrat, and he reaches Qaba Qawsayn. Surah Al-Najm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, at Qaba Qawsayn, the Prophet ﷺ reached that point where he was 2 bows' length from the actual effulgence, the presence, the absolute presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And beyond that, no one goes. At that point, he stops. And he is told, you are now no longer a salik. You are now no longer a seeker. You are now no longer a wayfarer. You are now no longer a journeyer. You are now a abd. One stage room goes, the stage of salik and journeying, wayfaring, and he's given the cloak of ubudiyah, the cloak of servanthood, which is the absolute cognition of the state of man. In the salat every day, we confirm the station of the Prophet ﷺ by confirming his ubudiyah to Allah. So any other term drops. The highest praise you can give a person is to call him Abdullah. And then at that point he gives up. He gives up on his independence. He gives up on his ability to define things for himself, to plan for himself, and submits to the complete commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he reaches the station of what he calls Aw Adna, Qaba Qawsayn, the 2 bows' length, Aw Adna, or nearer. So he is now at the maximum point where he's allowed to reach the level of ubudiyah. The meaning of all of this might sound esoteric, it might sound unusual. It is really to confirm to man that the seeds of his own perfectibility are with him. The seeds where he achieves not necessarily complete fusion, but he reaches a point where he knows that he has within him all the elements that, if properly ordered, can give him the access to the human, the true human condition, which is the condition of being Abdullah. The whole cosmology or spiritual architecture, as it were, of Ibn Arabi really has a certain number of themes attached to it. It ultimately ends in the possibility of human perfection. But to reach that stage requires that we understand something about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the unfolding of creation, created universes and conditions and states that are not accessible to us by using only our physical or intellective capabilities. And his architecture, his system, as it were, is based on, there are certain themes that constantly recur. One of them is the use of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to understand the way in which the first effulgence unfolds. And the use of the names, that is, the names have life and existence in their own, but are also indicators to the divine essence. Concepts of wujud. I'm sure you have come across the ideas of wahdat al-wujud, that is unity of all existence. But of course, he never used that term. But existence and non-existence, the nature of it, how existence is being in its first form, as it were. That being gives rise to existence. And existence is something that one also finds, that you seek it in its true effulgence. It is not normal, it is not just existence in the sense that it covers all created entities and states. It is also the condition of seeking it. Wujud comes from wajad, which means to find. So the process of seeking the forms and the parameters that we are allowed to see of existence is part of the system of Ibn Arabi. Another one deals with the absolute transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is his tanzih, and the absolute proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his tashbih. We have to come to terms with the transcendence and the proximity. Both of them are necessary conditions for us to begin to see with the two eyes that Ibn Arabi says are necessary for true vision. One eye is the eye of reason, of intellect, of discursive thinking, and the other eye is the eye that sees into this parallel universe, into this universe of which we are only a system, only a subpart. It is a much greater universe, it's a much larger universe, it's a much more fundamental universe. And his three methods of knowing, that is of aql, using your intellect, naql, which is transmitted information, and he places a great deal of importance on that. One should not underestimate the dependence that Ibn Arabi has on reports and on ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a great exponent and a great scholar of the ahadith. Futuhat al-Makkiyah is scattered, is really sprinkled with hadith wherever you look. So his when we say naql, that it comes from it is transmitted from reliable authorities, is a very valid and in fact a critical form of knowing. One should not think that these reports and these reportages are somehow incidental or have a historic interest. They are fundamental to developing the faculty that allows you to see into the parallel universe. And the last element of knowing is kashf, or unveiling. And all of this, and with the understanding the meanings and purposes behind creation, we avoid what he calls wretchedness. The human perfection is the avoidance of ta'asa, or wretchedness. It's a confirmation of felicity and fitra. So, all of that, this entire universe of names, of existence, non-existence, fixed entities, the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way that we know things, the perfectibility of man, are embodied in man himself as a barzakh. He says, and this is my translation, is that the self is the unique articulation of the breath of the All-Merciful, of Nafs al-Rahman, aware of itself and the cosmos. And by the cosmos, we're not talking about the stars and going to the moon. We're talking, that is only an incidental part of it. We're talking about seeing through it, cutting through the veil and seeing through the celestial universes that exist as a result of us focusing on meaning and purpose. So, in summary, as it were, his principles of his system, of his universe, starts with the kun of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which tumble out in the form of creative words, which are in turn made out of letters. And each of these letters has a position in the universe of the spirit. The first creative act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what he calls the creation of the universal soul. And he relates that to the Arabic letter ha. So the first creative act is to create the engine of creation, as it were. Allah's first creative act is to create the possibility of creation. And there we have the soul, the universal soul, that is the life force that goes into each and every entity and element, whether it's existent or non-existent, whether it is real or potential, and goes into the forms in which nature manifests itself. The second aspect of his cosmology relates to the way in which the universal soul, as it were, or nature begins to form itself. And here we're not talking about, again, in terms of time and space. We're talking about the components of the celestial heaven, which includes the arsh, the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It includes the kursi, the footstool, and so on. Then each of these is related to a letter or a haraka of the alphabet, of the Arabic alphabet. Each of these stages of the effulgence is related to that. For example, when we come to the celestial spheres, the one that I have talked about, the seven heavens and so on, each of them has a certain letter attached to it. That's why when you read Ibn Arabi, you have to understand sometimes there are letters that don't fit in, or that certain words that don't really make sense and can lead you at one level to think of it as gibberish. And I'm saying that really because I cannot make sense out of it. But once you understand that it's a different way of using letters and different way of using words, this gibberish becomes absolute clarity from another perspective. So you can't just, if you open the book and read it, you say this is all nonsense. Certain chapters of it are really not just profound in their obscurity, but once you see them in a different way, it's a different language, and therefore the language and the way that these words are articulated are really critical to understanding. Again, Jim, the alphabet, the Arabic letter Jim, which is like G or a soft G. He says it refers to the darkest of possible spheres of existence, which shows the complete independence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all creation. This is the Adam. Then, in his spiritual universe, as it were, these elements of body, form, universal soul, nature, come together to form composite material, composite spiritual material. And generally it is the two opposites. For example, the male principle, father, he associates with certain heavenly spheres. The female principle, mother, he associates with other spheres. And these combine to form things like the spiritual minerals, as it were, or the spiritual components of entities. He calls these the progenies. Then the other element of his universe is the spiritual universe, where angels and jinn predominate. Man, in his present state, can sometimes crack these barriers from one universe to the next. Not to the universe beyond that of the spiritual. It's very difficult. In fact, it's impossible for us to get into universes where ideas and meanings can happen without having a mi'raj, without having an ascension. But sometimes it is possible. Those are those of great power, who have Solomonic power, as it were, to cross into the spiritual realm. And sometimes the other side can happen. That is, jinn can cross barriers that stop these universes colliding. Ultimately, we have the human being. And human being is governed by, in his humanity, in his totality, is governed by the letter Mim, which is like the Roman M. And the human being is the jami' of all of that. So many of the great walis of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not least Imam Ali, refers to the potential of the macrocosm existing in man. And this is the human being as perfected in this system. So the human being who is part of the celestial world is not the same as, but can be the same as you and I. So there are two of us. Each one of us relates to different categories and different things and different aspects. One has a certain set of rules and guidelines for his or her behavior, and these are the rules that we live day by day. We live on oxygen, we live on laws of gravity and so on. And the other one is in a different hierarchy. And the jami', the human being as the jami', the gatherer, and the ability to cross from one into the other is what his khilafah of Allah really means to Ibn Arabi. And the waw, which is the end towards the end of the Arabic alphabet, is the stations of the walis. And that is his, in brief outline, is his universe. Now, do we have time? I can go on, but
Please go on.
What does really all this mean to us in our daily life and in our spiritual journey, as it were? I mean, we all know that to be Abdullah is superior than to be a Salik and to be a journeyer. And what does this mean in terms of our conduct? The barzakhness of human beings, that is the ability to have one foot in one universe, another foot in another universe, is the key to this. And this should be the key to action. The book that we have, the Quran al-Kareem, refers to the past and talks about past empires rising and falling, past deeds of human beings, being mainly those of folly and hubris that leads to decay and destruction. But the Quran al-Kareem never says that this is the future. This is always the past. انظروا كيف كان. It is not determinist. The importance of the past to us, Shaykh has said many times not to wallow in the past. But I don't think he ever said not to learn from the past. The past, or history if you want to call it that, is the way that unfolds as a result of the way that men interact with the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We as individuals obviously have we write our own book by the way that we interact with these decrees. If we interact with them positively, the outcome is positive. If we interact with them negatively, the outcome is negative. But history as a whole is a result of humanity's interaction with Allah's decrees. The commands of Allah are known. How we relate to them is the condition that we create for ourselves. So while we are in daily movement, this other universe is there. It is not the universe of meaning, the universe of purpose, the universe of ascension is there. It is not absent. It is not something that we will only visualize or see when our sight becomes steel, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Qaf. No. The degree with which we interact positively and successfully with Allah's commands is the way that we write a good history. The way that we end up with a bad history, we have a shabby history, a painful history, a painful past, is the way in which we react negatively or heedlessly with Allah's decrees. The commands are perfect. They have a fixed perfection here, and the way that you deal with it, the way that you interact and thread in and out of it, is what unfolds events. If you go back to the Quran Kareem, just look back. Today is absolutely the result of the way that we or our ancestors interacted. And it is every day, every second, there is a possibility of renewal. The perfectibility of man is possible in time, only if we recognize that there is another sphere with which, if we interact positively with it, we are bound to end up with the earth that we will inherit. There's no doubt about it. Oppression, racism, murder, genocide, you name it. It's as a result of men interacting negatively, foolishly, heedlessly, carelessly, neglectfully, disastrously, you name it, with Allah's decrees. Well, how else can it be? They are clear, Allah's decrees, as to what to do. So every moment, there's a moment, the possibility of renewal and refreshing. And that moment, I believe, can lead to the city of God, as it were, being on earth. I think Islam is not Christianity. Christianity says it is not possible to perfect a human being in time. The Quran al-Karim always makes that possibility open. It doesn't negate that possibility. It reminds us that it has not happened, and reminds us the conditions. Sometimes these conditions are so difficult and so onerous for us now that we think it will not happen. I mean, if you tell me, all else being equal, will there be a utopia tomorrow? I'll tell you no. But if sufficient people are cognizant and aware at the deepest level of the way in which manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have led to creation and what are His commands, there is no doubt that we'll end up with the society that we deserve. I'm not saying that Ibn Arabi's system is perfect. This is his system, his way of seeing the unfolding of the acts of creation. We may see it differently, but there are certain boundaries and rules which we have to abide by. So, if you want to call it the utopia of Islam, that is the good society, is possible if true mu'mins interact correctly with Allah's laws. Most of the time, nearly all the time, they haven't. Some fleeting moments of history they have. But the echoes of those fleeting moments stay with us. That's why we all believe that Islam can perfect our lives now. And it can, if we understand the pathway on the other world, the other universe. And Ibn Arabi, who is a great master, had with him Rasul al-Tawfiq. He had with him a guide. Guidance and hidayah manifested by recognizing the signs of wilayah in those amongst us who either are acknowledged as such or are hidden is an essential aspect of this journey, which will allow us to become better, at least less imperfect human beings. Alhamdulillah.
Sidi Ali Allawi for taking us on this Mi'raj, while we also listen to the Mi'raj planes flying overhead, and they're having their air show today, and we are having our show and our experience of Mi'raj. To recap, Sidi Ali highlighted the seven heavens. The first potentiality of Adam and Khilafah, of that full responsibility. The second of heaven of spirituality, Ruhaniyya, and Isa alayhi salam coming through. The third heaven of Yusuf alayhi salatu salam, of beauty and its boundless potentialities for Shahada. And the fourth heaven of Idris alayhi salatu wasalam, and of Qudra, and the 5th of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, and realizing our full potential, the 6th heaven of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, to understand the underpinnings of language, of speech, of Kalimullah, and the 7th heaven of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam as the Jami', the gatherer of all these potentialities put together, and the gatheredness epitomize that he sought to dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and getting close. Sidi Ali Allawi has also highlighted what all this means for us after looking at the cosmology of Ibn Arabi in a much more subtle, measured and nuanced way. The question of what does it all mean for us? And 3 points he particularly highlighted was that how you could have a foot in two worlds, the question of being in different worlds. The second point he very saliently made was learning from the past, but not to wallow in the past, how to interact with what has been our neglect, our carelessness, in a more correct way, what Shaykh Fadullah referred to as the cosmology of pure beingness, how to be now fully. And then to bring us to this moment of renewal, where we're able to truly establish those moments of light, those moments which will stay with us, which will carry us through in our journey. Jazakallah once again to Sidi Ali Allawi. A few announcements before we break. One, we've confiscated 2 phones so far, and we shall enjoy doing more of that.